How in the world does a boat float?
How in the world does a light bulb work?
How in the world does a bird fly? Where in the world is the deepest spot in the ocean? Why in the world is the sky blue? Where in the world are the 7 ancient wonders?
Where in the world are the northern lights?
How in the world does the moon affect the tides?
How in the world does an electoral college work?
How in the world do bits and bytes work on the computer? How in the world do fish breathe? How in the world does a bridge work?
Hey there, fellow explorers. Welcome aboard the Airship Curiosity. I'm Pilot Lindy, and I'm surrounded by a bunch of interesting pals who are ready to take you around the world to show you how in the world. See, it's simple. You have questions, and I know just where to find the answers. Time to fix that alarm. Of course, that does mean a question.
What in the world is so special about Thomas Jefferson's home?
Maybe it's just the overall design, or the view on top of an 850-foot high peak in the mountains of Virginia, or the unique features. Let's stop talking and just take a look. Nestled atop a mountain in the Shenandoah Valley sits a home as unique as its designer. This is Monticello. Meaning little mountain in Italian, Monticello is the masterpiece of the writer of the Declaration of Independence, founder of the University of Virginia, and third president of the United States, Thomas Jefferson. The house was completed 200 years ago. Nowadays, the house and surrounding fields attracts 500,000 visitors a year. But even 200 years ago, it attracted the curious.
When Thomas Jefferson was alive, it was an attraction. People would come up to see him because he'd been the author of the Declaration, he'd been president, and so he had visitors he didn't know who would just sort of show up.
At first glance, visitors are struck by the beauty and design. Then they start to notice some of the features that make the house unique. One of which you can find on the back of a nickel, the west side and the dome.
That dome was something that Jefferson wanted put on his house, really for the external appearance.
Jefferson said no shape is simpler than a circle. It was the first private home in America to feature such a structure. The main entrance is through a portico on the east side. A portico is a porch or walkway with a roof supported by columns, often leading to the entrance of a building. And there's the interior.
When you first walk into Monticello, you're struck by this big green room, a room with a green floor, the entrance hall, and you see on the walls a whole variety of things that reflect Jefferson's interest. It's kind of a museum. So you can see paintings, you can see antlers of animals Jefferson had put on the wall to compare the sizes of different kinds of animals in America.
Also in the entrance hall, Jefferson's great clock. It was his design, and it's powered by weights.
Those weights go down either side of the wall to the floor, but you can see if you look down at the floor a basic problem. The ropes, the cabling ran out of room. So these big cannonball-like weights have to go somewhere, so holes were cut in the floor and down the weights go.
And one side of the weights mark the days of the week, right down to the floor to Friday. But they ran out of room, so Saturday is in the cellar. There's a family sitting room, Jefferson's library, which once contained 6,500 volumes. Years later, he sold much of that to the government, which were the first books in the Library of Congress. His office is functional, and he had a polygraph, a tool that was used to make copies of letters. His bedroom has skylights and an alcove bed. His parlor contains works of art and lots of musical instruments. And the kitchen has a dumbwaiter, a small hand-pulled elevator that brought food up from the kitchen below. And the kitchen wasn't the only room in the cellar. Jefferson buried all the workspaces into the mountainside beneath his home.
You know, a house like this one in his day, the kitchen's not in the house, and you need a dairy, there's no refrigerators, right? You need a smokehouse, you need a stable, he had an ice house. All these things are buried underneath the terraces that you see on either side. So those decks look like decks that people are walking on that stick out from either side. Underneath them are where all of these workspaces are.
While most plantations had other buildings that housed these workspaces, Jefferson had them placed below so they wouldn't interfere with his view of the mountain. And from there he could look north to Charlottesville and a work he was most proud of, the University of Virginia. That's the rotunda on the campus sticking out from that mountain. In spite of all his accomplishments, President, Secretary of State, Ambassador, Jefferson considered himself a farmer first. But his grave in the family cemetery just below the house does seem to tell a different story. Monticello is considered so important that it has been named a World Heritage Site by the United Nations. Oh, and the image of Monticello on the back of the nickel? With the exception of 2 years, it's been on the coin since 1936. As that annoying sound tells us, how about another question?
How in the world does gravity work?
Gravity? Now there's something to keep a person well grounded, but I think we can show you that it is all simply a matter of matter. For a topic of this weight, the Airship Curiosity drops in on the folks at the National Institute of Aerospace. Surely they can explain why what goes up must come down.
Gravity is basically a force that exists between any objects that have substance.
That substance is also called mass. We use the word mass to talk about how much matter is in an object, and weigh things to figure out how much mass there is. The best example possible to explain gravity is you. You are a body of matter. The Earth is also a body of matter. Gravity pulls you down to the Earth and allows you to walk around instead of floating. The more matter, the more gravity. So things that have a lot of matter, such as planets, moons, and stars, pull more. The pull or strength of gravity also depends on how far you are from something. This is why we are stuck to the surface of the Earth instead of being pulled off into the sun. But what about in outer space? We've seen astronauts floating around the space shuttle. Is there gravity in space? Look like fun? They are flying parabolas in order to experience weightlessness. A parabola is a geometrical shape that consists of one bend and two lines going off into infinity. Parabolic flights are used to train astronauts in weightless situations. Specially trained pilots fly these maneuvers between approximately 24,000 and 34,000 feet altitude. Each parabola takes 10 miles of airspace to perform and lasts approximately 1 minute from start to finish. The plane is initially pulled up to approximately 45 degrees. Next, the plane is pushed over the top to reach the zero gravity segment of the parabolas. For approximately 30 seconds, everything in the plane is weightless. Then a gentle pull-out is started, which allows flyers to stabilize on the mat of the aircraft floor. And then the maneuver is repeated. The weightlessness experienced by everyone inside the plane is actually equivalent to the type of free fall you experience when skydiving. In this case, however, the body of the aircraft surrounds you and protects you from the onrushing wind. As I mentioned earlier, gravity decreases with distance, so it is possible to be far away from a planet or star and feel less gravity. But that's not why astronauts feel weightless in space. It's the same as these people on the airplane. The reason that astronauts feel weightless actually has to do with their position compared to their spaceship. We feel weight on Earth because gravity is pulling us down, and we are pressed against the ground. Any ship in orbit around the Earth is slowly falling back, being pulled by the planet's gravity. Since the ship and the astronauts are falling at the same speed, the astronauts don't press against anything, so they feel weightless. Think of it as a tug of war between gravity and a rocket or a hot air balloon, or even trying to jump high. You always come back to Earth. So, what does it mean?
When you fall off your bike, you're going to go toward the ground as opposed to flying out in space.
You can feel something just like what the astronauts feel when you're going down in a fast-moving elevator or in a roller coaster. That's because everything is falling at the same speed, so you're weightless for just a bit. Now here's a fun little way to experience weightless free fall right over your own kitchen sink.
And now, another How in the World brain game.
Poke a hole into the bottom of a paper cup. Now cover the hole with your finger and fill it with water. Next, hold it above your head and over the sink and remove your finger. Look, water will drip out the hole. Now hold the cup up high and then drop it and watch it fall. While it is falling freely, the water does not drip out. Objects in free fall are weightless. whether in a plane, spaceship, or paper cup. Long exposure to weightlessness, like the astronauts experience in the space station, can result in muscles getting weaker and problems with the skeleton. Most astronauts, however, return to normal within a couple of days when they return from space. And we have to float away for just a bit, but stick around, we will be back. Sweet, would you look at that?
And now, another fact of Congress. When you were in kindergarten, did you play well with others? How would you grade Congress? Congress deals with many difficult issues, so we should expect some disagreements. But sometimes lawmakers get a little out of hand. Incivility and rudeness make it impossible to get anything done, and when nothing gets done, the government shuts down. The result, bad laws that affect us all. Civility doesn't mean that lawmakers have to agree with each other, just that they should respect each other. Only when lawmakers respect each other will lawmakers find common ground. When you're civil to someone else, good things happen. And that's another fact of Congress.
The bear climbed over the mountain, the bear climbed over the mountain, the bear climbed over the mountain, and what do you think he saw? What do you think he saw? What do you think he saw? The bear climbed over the mountain, the bear climbed over the mountain, the bear climbed over the mountain, and what do you think he saw?
When I have an asthma attack, I feel scared. Sometimes my parents have to take me to the hospital. I feel like a fish with no water.
You know how to react to their asthma attacks. Here's how to prevent them. Call 1-866-NO-ATTACKS. Visit www.noattacks.org or call your doctor. Because even one attack is one too many.
Welcome back aboard the Airship Curiosity. So far we visited Monticello and then we floated around. Now we can... Ooh, there's a strange one, but that does mean another question.
What in the world is the true story about the Witch of Pongo?
Legend? Fable? Local lore? Tales of witchcraft and accusations spread throughout the colonies in the late 17th and early 18th centuries. One accused actually found herself pardoned 300 years later. Let's go back in time. The Airship Curiosity steps back in time to take a look at an incident that inspired a legend, the trial and ducking of the Witch of Pongo. Princess Anne County, now Virginia Beach, was sparsely settled in the late 17th and early 18th century. Those who were here worked large farms. And one of those farms was the birthplace of the woman who became known as the Witch of Pongo.
My name be Grace Sherwood, and I was born on the Muddy Creek Road on 195 acres of land owned by my parents, John and Susan White.
According to history and legend, Grace learned early about the ways of the farm. She worked the land, worked with herbs, and became a healer like her mother.
People thought I knew a little too much, that a woman should never be able to heal a person, or heal a sick animal, or know when the weather's turning bad. It was conjuring up of the storms, they said, that was happening.
To conjure means to summon a spirit or to influence something through magic or a supernatural power. Those people were wrong to accuse Grace.
When the rains come, when the irrigation's not done, it's going to flood the land. The cotton turns yellow, you lose your crop. When a bulb was poisoned by eating the wrong kind of seed, they didn't ask me to help. You stay away, you witch, they'd didn't understand much at all. They let their crops rot in the field. They wouldn't listen to Mother Nature when they should. They had a hard life and they only made it harder for themselves.
People started blaming Grace for putting a curse on their crops and animals. One even claimed that Grace came through her keyhole at night and jumped on her back like a cat, scratching and clawing. Grace was actually tried in court 12 times. Finally, a judge sent a sheriff to her house to look for any signs of her being a witch. He looked for a witch bottle by the door. People would bury them to ward off spirits. When he couldn't find one, he arrested Grace, accusing her of being a witch. She agreed to a trial by water. So on July 10, 1706, the crowds gathered along the shores of the Lynnhaven River. The trial was simple. Grace would be bound from thumb to big toe.
Because if I was tied, cross-bound, thumbs to big toes, thrown in the bay, and drowned, I would be innocent. My body could be buried on the parish ground, holy ground. But if I were to swim, I was guilty. Pure water was casting out this evil spirit.
So, on that July 10th, 2 boats went into the water. One with the sheriff's posse, one with the judge, the sheriff, and Grace. They rowed to the deepest part of the bay. The crowd roared and chanted,
"Duck to it! Duck to it! Duck to it!"
And then, Grace cried out,
"Before this day be through, you will all get a worse ducking than I!"
I sank to the bottom, floated to the top. They tied a heavy 13-pound Bible around my neck as if I were to sink and drown. I could be buried on parish ground. I untied my vines, swam to the top, swam around the bay and laughed at the people.
When they pulled Grace from the water, clouds formed and then a torrential rain. People tried to get away only to be washed into deep ditches. They believe she conjured up the storm. She was taken back to the courthouse and spent 7 years in jail. When she was released, Grace returned to Pungo, where she lived in peace for the rest of her life. No more accusations, no more trials, living until 1740, passing away at the age of 80.
300 years hasn't changed one bit. You still have jealous neighbors no matter how hard you help them, but you must keep on. You have to keep the upper hand.
And of course, Grace is remembered some 300 years later in Virginia Beach. How? Have you ever ridden on Witch Duck Road? With that, we're on a road to a break. Stick around. We'll be back in just a bit.
And now, another fact of Congress. Our government is like a big 3-layer cake. We have local government, state government, and national government, often called federal government. But your local government doesn't handle foreign affairs, and your federal government doesn't handle trash pickup. Local government handles local issues like police, water, and building permits. State government handles issues about your state, such as education, health care, and recreation. Federal government handles national issues such as national parks, the military, and space exploration. The U.S. Congress is a part of our federal government. This system of dividing responsibilities among governments is called federalism. And that's another fact of Congress.
Once they've outgrown their toddler seat, they're still not ready for adult safety belts alone. 4'9" is the magic number. Until then, kids need a booster seat. Make sure your little pumpkin gets there safely. Visit boosterseat.gov.
Hey, there you are. Welcome back aboard the Airship Curiosity as we sail through the skies for fun and adventure. Do you think I can find another one on the internet?
How in the world do they recover shipwrecks?
I don't know.
Whether it's for historical reasons or sunken treasure, recovering shipwrecks can be tough work. To prove it, I'll take you to one of the most historical finds from the sea. Our research on this topic takes us to the home of one of the most amazing and important shipwreck recoveries of our time. The Mariners Museum in Newport News, Virginia, is home to the Monitor Center, which houses artifacts from the ironclad USS Monitor. The Monitor was a participant in one of the most important naval engagements of all time, the Battle of Hampton Roads, which saw ironclad ships face each other for the first time in history, the Monitor and the Merrimack. Months later, the Monitor sunk off Cape Hatteras on New Year's Eve, 1862, and she stayed out of sight until 1973.
And it was found to be lying upside down on its displaced turret, and so it was a very unusual shipwreck site.
That site? Off Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, where there are so many shipwrecks, it's called the Graveyard of the Atlantic. But here was an important piece of history, sitting 230 feet below the surface of the ocean. Could it be saved?
First big job was making the decision that we did want to recover, and that was because we had already determined that the Monitor's hull was collapsing. So we had to do something unless we wanted to see all of these historical objects disintegrate.
The site was protected when it was named a marine sanctuary by the government. Then the real work began.
The really complicated thing about the Monitor was being upside down, sitting on its turret. We knew we wanted to bring the turret up because that was the Monitor's most unique feature.
Turret is a 14th century word meaning little tower. The military use of the word is a structure that houses guns. The Monitor was the first ship to feature a revolving gun turret, and so bringing that turret to the surface became the goal. To get it, they had to carefully remove the ship's propeller.
It was incredible because it wouldn't seem like a propeller could be very fragile, but this one is made out of iron, and it had been lying in the sea for more than a century, and so the iron had become very brittle.
The recovery of shipwrecks is not easy, and sometimes it's impossible. But cannons and coins and other artifacts have been pulled from wreck sites around the world. It requires planning, special equipment, and often highly trained divers. For the Monitor, the U.S. Navy lent a hand. Divers in water that deep can only stay below the surface for a short amount of time. When two come up, two take their place. When the divers return to the surface, they go to a decompression chamber where the divers readjust from the deep pressure down below to regular pressure on the surface. There are barges with cranes, and sometimes special tools have to be manufactured to raise part or all of the ship. Some have even been recovered using large inflated balloons. As far as the Monitor, once the propeller and other items were brought to the surface, the turret became the main challenge.
But because the ship was upside down and lying on the turret, we had to really devise a pretty difficult plan, no matter how we went about it.
It was decided to cut away the damaged part of the ship's hull that was on top of the turret.
When it finally came the day to try and raise the turret, everyone was nervous. This was the big enchilada. This was the thing that we'd worked for years to finally get to, the Monitor's turret.
And on August 5th, 2002, it happened. A big barge bouncing in the sea and a big crane working to retrieve history, lifting and then breaking the surface.
Between 3 and 6, we were right on.
Wow, that's the first time this has been seen since New Year's Eve of 1862.
All of the items from the Monitor shipwreck were brought to the Mariners Museum, where the focus has shifted to conservation. Here the famous turret and her cannons will lie for years in a special solution to keep them from corrosion. But there are plenty of artifacts on display. By the way, that area off Cape Hatteras, it's home to more than 600 known shipwrecks. And a sound like that could sink any ship. But that means somebody's making contact.
Where in the world does pollen come from?
It looks like chalk dust, and it is everywhere come spring. But where does it come from? Let's find out.
Basically, when the ground warms up, new seeds are going to start to sprout because that warm temperature helps them germinate and create their new growth. Trees alone can produce a lot of pollen, and that's mainly what you're going to see all over your cars is maybe the oaks and things like that that produce so much pollen that it's wind pollinated. So good for them. There's lots of wind, it blows it around, lands on your car, it lands everywhere. But that pollen is, like I said, just blown around, and it's good for the oak trees because when it connects with the flowers of the oak, that's when you're going to get your acorns and help with the reproduction of the plant. Along with oaks, there's, like I said, pretty much every flower produces pollen of some sort, so it's really just coming from everywhere. I mean, it lasts pretty much the whole summer until that flower produces its seeds. It's going to have that pollen out there in hopes that it's going to be pollinated.
In addition to all the good stuff that pollen does, there is one side effect, hay fever, which is nothing to sneeze at. Well, with that, we need to sail on out of here, so until the next time, keep looking up for the Airship Curiosity. When you see us, maybe we'll have an answer or two for you. You know, cool stuff like, how in the world do telescopes work? What in the world does a grocery receipt? Where in the world?
Severe weather emergencies can occur with little to no warning, so you can protect your family and your property by being prepared and staying informed. Visit the city's website, vbgov.com/beprepared, and learn what you can do to ride out the storm. Make an emergency supplies kit, develop a family emergency plan, and see where you can find official city information. Have a kit, have a plan, be informed. Your three-step all-hazards approach to ensuring your safety and protection of your property.
Wish.
Love. Sand.
Surf.
Blue. Light.
Fuel.
Hours. Tide. Cool.
Sail. Wave.
Blue. Grow. Home.
Keep the good vibe. Virginia Beach.